Welcome to Christian Podcast, where we look at the world and our own lives through a Christian lens. Today's topic is A Beacon of Faith, the Enduring City Upon a Hill. You've asked us to take a deep dive into a really insightful article. It's called Mike Johnson, A Beacon of Faith in a Fractured World and the Unfading Light of the City Upon a Hill. So our goal here is to pull out the key ideas from the source, help you understand how these historical faith principles are, still shaping things today, leadership, individual actions. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. And to really get this city upon a hill idea, we kind of need to go back, way back, to the very beginning, 1620, with the Mayflower Pilgrims. They weren't just sailing for, religious freedom alone. They had this really big spiritual vision. They actually made a covenant, a kind of solemn promise to establish a community rooted in faith with all our strength and honor. And they saw themselves quite specifically as stewards of God, chosen really to build this city upon a hill, which wasn't just some nice metaphor. It was meant to be a real visible example, a model of faith and virtue for everyone, for all nations to see. And what's really fascinating, I think, is that it wasn't just about being left alone to practice their faith. It was bigger. It was about transforming, everything, daily life, business, government, making it all a practice of faith.
Wow. That's a huge vision. So, practically speaking, how did they actually live that out? The city upon a hill ideal, especially, when it came to things like work, their jobs. How did faith really shape their, let's say, economic lives?
Well, the core concept was calling, baruf, as Max Weber later called it. Basically, it meant that every single job, no matter how ordinary it seemed, was seen as a divine mission. It was elevated. So a farmer wasn't just, growing food. They were working to feed neighbors, serving God that way. A craftsman wasn't just making things. They were honing their skills to glorify the Creator through doing excellent work. Even a ruler, they governed with justice like a river. They saw their power as a trust from God. So this belief, it completely reframed personal success. It wasn't just for you. It became a blessing for the whole community, all for God's glory.
Okay, what about money, wealth? That's something people often get wrong about the Puritans, right? Like, did they just hate money and think it was bad? How did that fit into the city upon a hill?
Yeah, that's a really common misunderstanding. No, not at all. They valued hard work, diligence, absolutely. And they saw prosperity sometimes as a sign of God's blessing. But, and this is the key, they strongly condemned excess, greed, showing off. Wealth wasn't seen as, your personal prize to just enjoy. It was viewed as God's entrusted property, a trust. So if you were wealthy, the understanding was it was not for you, meaning private desire or personal luxury, but to fill the needs of the poor. They really insisted that wealth must serve the common good. This whole idea, the stewardship consciousness, it meant seeing yourself as a manager of God's resources. You had an obligation. The article actually calls this a really scarce spiritual resource today, which is interesting, because the Puritans accumulated wealth not to indulge, but specifically to witness the God who gives grace by using it responsibly. For others, without that stewardship piece, you just get, materialism, maybe inequality. Wealth just becomes about getting more wealth.
Right. It changes the whole motivation. It's not about personal gain. It's a spiritual duty. That historical context is really crucial for understanding where we are now. So, okay, zooming out a bit, what does this mean for the bigger picture? How did these religious ideas actually end up shaping our whole modern economy?
Well, if you connect the dots, Max Weber, in his, classic work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, he found something pretty profound. He argued that modern capitalism didn't just spring up because of technology or resources. A huge part of it was a spiritual force, what he named the Protestant Ethic. And at the heart of that ethic were two main things: calling, which we just talked about, and asceticism. So Protestants saw their work, their secular job, as a divine mission, right? A way to serve God. They believed hard work, discipline, even rational wealth accumulation actually glorified God. It wasn't inherently bad. But at the same time, they practiced asceticism, which basically means a disciplined, restrained lifestyle, rejecting luxury, instant gratification. It wasn't about punishing themselves. It was about focusing their energy and money on their calling, on productive work, seeing wealth as God's entrusted property to be reinvested, managed wisely, not, wasted.
That sounds very different from how we often think about capitalism today, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like the focus on immediate profits or spending. Can you give some examples of how that actually played out in business?
Oh, absolutely. This ethic led to some really specific behaviors that kind of built the foundation for modern business. So merchants, driven by the sense of calling, they aimed to grow their businesses, sure, but not just for themselves. It was about creating jobs, providing useful things, genuinely serving the community. Their business was their divine purpose, in a way. Bankers, thinking like this, would use credit to back well, good works projects that help the community grow, not just to make a quick buck off high interest. And entrepreneurs, they really believe that profit is a byproduct of morality. Deep down, they felt only honest dealing, treating employees fairly, that was what pleased God. That was real success. It wasn't just about giving to charity later. It was about building ethics right into the business itself.
That's a really powerful idea. So Weber talks about capitalism's soul.
Right.
What exactly did he mean by that? And what happens when, as you said, money breaks free from faith? What does that imply for us now?
Right, capitalism's soul. Weber used that phrase to describe this connection, this fusion of economic activity with the sense of purpose, with faith, with calling. He argued that when your economy is grounded in these kinds of spiritual and ethical principles, it actually drives real progress, innovation, community, responsible growth. But he warned, when money gets detached from that, when it's just about accumulation for its own sake, untethered from any higher purpose or discipline, well, then it risks becoming just a tool of desire, of greed, of endless consumption. And that leaves us with a really big question today, doesn't it? What is the moral foundation, the ethical underpinning of our economic life right now? Does our capitalism still have that soul, or have we kind of lost that connection?
That's definitely something to think about. A critical question. So, okay, we've traced this concept from the Pilgrims through Weber. How does this vision, the city upon a hill, show up today? Does the article point to any modern figures who sort of exemplify this?
It does. The article we're looking at specifically points to someone like Mike Johnson as a modern example of this vision. It describes his worldview as being just fundamentally shaped by the Bible. There's that quote where he was asked how he tackles any issue, and he just said plainly, go to the bookshelf and get a Bible. That's my worldview. That's what I believe. No. The article presents this as, evangelical Christianity in practice, applying biblical principles directly to what's happening to how he leads, things like his public prayers after the Maine shooting, presented as direct faith responses to real-world events.
Okay, so it's not just talk. How does the article say his actual life, his leadership, reflect that?
Yeah.
This biblical view and this idea of stewardship we talked about. Are there concrete examples?
Yes, the article provides several. It mentions him living out his political calling with what it calls an unbought conscience. His simplicity is framed as just a natural result of his faith, like driving a 12-year-old truck, apparently donating his salary and bonuses to charity or disaster relief, volunteering time at shelters. These are shown as practical examples of that asceticism and stewardship idea. And then personal choices, like adopting a black teenager when he was 16, or turning their garage into a free cancer counseling center. These are framed as living out love thy neighbor. It all ties back to that stewardship consciousness, seeing his position, his influence, any money, not as his own personal stuff, but as a trust, something to manage for the common good. And the measure is always, according to the article, whether they glorify God and benefit others.
That paints a pretty clear picture, and it sounds like from the article's perspective, he's not necessarily unique in showing this kind of stewardship today. Are there other examples?
No, definitely not presented as unique. The article actually brings in others, like Warren Buffett. It highlights his, quote, simplicity and generosity, living in the same house for decades, pledging billions away. And the article explicitly quotes Buffett viewing his wealth as a trust fund entrusted to me by society. That sounds incredibly similar to those Puritan merchants, doesn't it? Wealth as God's entrusted property. You can even see echoes there, perhaps, of calling, and that disciplined approach Buffett's known for long-term value investing, not quick speculation. It's a kind of secular asceticism, maybe. Focused, disciplined accumulation for a larger purpose, eventually given away. And Paul Allen, the Microsoft co-founder, is mentioned too, quietly funding huge global health and education projects. He apparently said, wealth is God's tool. I just strive to use it well. So the article sets these figures up as contrasts to those who just use power and money for themselves. They're presented as witnesses showing a different path is possible even now, a path of diligence without greed, achievement without arrogance. Their actions seem to line up with that core ethic, regardless of their personal beliefs.
It's really striking, how those old principles seem to resonate in different ways today. So bringing this all together, what's the takeaway for us for this enduring idea of the city upon a hill in our world, which often feels, pretty broken?
Well, the article's conclusion is actually quite hopeful, surprisingly. It says, look, even facing what it calls a wilderness without God or human decency, we shouldn't despair. That vision, that city upon a hill, okay, maybe it's dusted by secularism, maybe it feels distant, But it hasn't actually collapsed, and its revival, the article argues, doesn't start with big political statements or anything like that. It starts small, with everyday choices, like the courage of one politician to resist temptation, the integrity of a business owner choosing the honest path over the easy profit, the generosity of someone wealthy deciding to give rather than just accumulate more. It's those individual, consistent actions that build up.
That really shifts the focus, doesn't it? Away from just institutions or big movements, back to personal conviction, personal actions.
Exactly. And the article finishes really strongly on this point. It says basically, there will always be people willing to, metaphorically, carry the cross, walk the difficult path, make their lives into beacons. It uses Mike Johnson, again, his straightforwardness about his faith, the adoption story, praying publicly as an example, showing that the city upon a hill is alive. It lives on in every single faithful life. And that is faith's power, according to this piece. It doesn't promise an easy life, not at all, but it offers strength when things get tough. It doesn't promise fame or riches, but it gives a sense of meaning, something eternal that goes beyond just stuff. So the call is to see these lights, these examples around us, and maybe become one ourselves, because rebuilding that city, it suggests, isn't someone else's job. It's the calling for anyone who's seeking truth and trying to live it.
So we've really traced this powerful vision of the city upon a hill from the Puritans through Weber's analysis of the Protestant ethic and seeing how these ideas of calling and stewardship still echo today in figures like Mike Johnson, but also potentially in people like Buffett or Allen.
Yeah, it really highlights how these deep-seated faith principles can and arguably still do influence leadership, society, and just our individual choices. It reminds you that understanding these ideas is one thing, but applying them, that's where the value is.
We hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about. What really stands out to you about how these old religious ethics might be shaping things today, maybe in ways we don't always recognize? Or how do you see people living out these kinds of virtues in the modern world? Thank you for listening. See you next time.